Honestly, building your first gaming PC can often be really stressful, especially when you're trying to select the best parts that aren't going to cause buyer's remorse like 2 months down the line. Whether this is going to be your very first gaming PC or if you've built a couple already, I guarantee I'm going to deliver you some value in today's video. Let's get into it. Real quickly before getting into tip numero uno, big thanks to WD_BLACK and specifically their brand new SN770 NVMe SSD for sponsoring today's video. We'll talk all about this drive later in just a bit, but as a worthy successor to the SN750, which was one of my favorite drives for builds and flips, and with how these read and write speeds can actually make a visible difference when gaming, you'll definitely want to hear more about this drive later. Oh, and also WD_BLACK is allowing me to give away this PC for free to one of you guys. Literally all you have to do is go over to my Twitter page at ZachsTechTurf, or just click the link down in the description and then just retweet my pinned tweet that's about the giveaway. Make sure you're following me too in case if you win. But yeah, good luck to everybody, and hopefully we don't knock over any more parts. Alright, so I don't even have this PC built, as you can see, so I'm going to take you along with me and share with you the best tips on how to buy and build your gaming PC easier. And the first one, which is pretty simple, is to just buy the latest generation of your CPU. As you can see, this here is the Intel 12th Gen i5-12600K, and the reason why I say to do this is because although you may get a tiny bit better price to performance with buying an older gen CPU, there are just so many factors to consider on this purchase. Most of them I highlighted in my recent CPU and GPU combo video, by the way, and you could accidentally shortchange yourself with some features if you aren't careful. For example, this Intel 12th Gen supports PCIe Gen 4 slots, the new concept of P and E cores, and it's also the first gen to support DDR5 memory. If you decide to save some money with an Intel 10th Gen, for example, you could definitely still build a powerful system, but you wouldn't have any of those features that I just listed. So if you're planning your build for the first time, it's probably easier if you just go with the latest and greatest and spend a little bit more money. Another thing to truly consider is buyer's remorse, which may not seem like a big deal to some of you, but after spending the $800, $900, or even over $1,000 on your gaming PC, having buyer's remorse later on down the line because you made a bad purchasing decision now will heavily affect you, and I just don't want that feeling for any of you. Moving on for the second tip, make sure you list out all of the features you want your motherboard to have before you actually buy it. There are several different features that a motherboard could have that you're interested in, and most budget motherboards don't pack those features a lot of the time, so it's important to establish this before buying so you don't make another bad decision. This MSI Pro Z690 is a great example because I personally made certain decisions that were specific to this motherboard. This is actually the DDR4 version of this motherboard. This specific motherboard comes in both DDR4 and DDR5, but I made this DDR4 decision just so I can make this build a little bit more budget minded, but you definitely could have went down the DDR5 path, which is a little bit more future proof, but definitely more expensive. This board also has built-in Wi-Fi, which isn't a super important decision, but still one that needs to be made. You can always buy a USB Wi-Fi stick if your motherboard doesn't have it, but some people definitely prefer to have it right out of the box. And finally, definitely the most important decision when buying the motherboard is the chipset. This is the Z690 chipset, which means I can take full advantage of our K-series CPU and I can overclock it. Remember that you don't need to make the decision to overclock right now. You could be perfectly fine and happy buying this CPU motherboard combo and not overclocking it, but it does rest easy on my mind knowing that after I buy this, even if I don't want to overclock it now, I at least have the option to later on down the line if that's something that I want to pursue. This is actually super important for new PC builders specifically. Maybe right now you're 100% focused on just getting the right parts and hoping everything gets built properly, but as you quickly progress down your career of being a PC gamer and PC builder, you might be very thankful that you got an overclockable CPU and mobile combo a few months from now. Moving on, we get to our third tip, and that's simply to buy an SSD from a trusted brand, and don't skip out on this one. You've probably seen myself and other PC flippers on YouTube try to save some money with buying those cheaper and sometimes kind of shady models of SSDs, and that method is perfectly fine for more experienced PC flippers trying to maximize their profits, but for a beginner PC builder, I would highly recommend just going with a trusted brand like WD_BLACK. Like I said in the intro, this video is indeed sponsored by WD_BLACK, and this here is the SN770, which is their brand spanking new Gen 4 NVMe drive. For specs, the SN770 comes in capacities of 250 GB 1GB, 500GB, 1TB, and 2TB. And this 1TB model that we have here today is rocking sequential read speeds of up to 5150 megabytes per second and sequential write speeds of up to 4900 megabytes per second. By buying a trusted brand of an SSD, not only does that ensure that you're just getting a quality product, but it also comes with a proper 5-year warranty, and that's definitely something to consider during your purchasing decisions. You can also noticeably see a difference with a proper fast NVMe drive, especially in games like Warzone, where you're constantly loading in and out of places like the Gulag, which I'm unfortunately very familiar with. But if it makes a difference like that, and if that's a game that you want to play, then buying a drive like this is definitely worth the money. The SN770 is also pretty interesting as it's a DRAM-less design, and before you instantly think that's a bad thing, over the last couple of years, DRAM-less designs in NVMe drives have become less and less of a factor, and with the proprietary WD controller design on here, it's actually still a very solid performer. As you'd expect, links to the SN770 and everything else that we're talking about today are down in the description, but let's continue on with our next tip of making buying and building your first gaming PC easier. The next thing I have for you is to use the Newegg Shuffle to grab your GPU before you do anything, and don't buy all of your parts now and save the GPU for last. If you have a little bit of time and patience, which you'll need anyway for buying a GPU right now, I would highly recommend starting at the Newegg Shuffle. That way you can pair whatever else you get in the GPU combo for your build. I'm pretty sure the Shuffle rewards accounts that I've never won before. Just for the record, most new people that enter the Shuffle these days win pretty quickly from what I've seen, and this is a great way to grab a new GPU. This EVGA RTX 3070 for the Win 3 Ultra is an example of that because it came paired with this EVGA Supernova 750G Plus power supply. If I would have bought everything up front and then waited to get the GPU like with this combo, I would have ended up with 2 power supplies, and remember, you can't just return one item of a Newegg combo back to Newegg, so that means I'd have to sell this one, and just don't do that, obviously, because you don't want to end up with 2 parts. This can happen with motherboards or SSDs as well. Just try to get that Newegg Shuffle combo first before buying anything else. As we're progressing with this build a bit, we get to the case, and now I'm not necessarily proud of this tip, but I do think it's a strategy that you should follow. This is more so to avoid buyer's remorse, but whenever you get to the case selection part of your process, I would really recommend you buy a case like this that has a front airflow panel, but not for the obvious reason of better airflow. I'm definitely the type of person that sometimes likes the smooth, clean lines of a case like the Deepcool MeCube 110, and it definitely doesn't get as nice of airflow as like this NZXT H510 flow. But the thing you need to be aware of is that some of the PC gaming community can be like a flock of vultures, and they love to eat people alive that use non-airflow cases. It's really dumb, and I hate that I have to recommend this, and I hate that our community is like this sometimes, but if you want to avoid buyer's remorse later on down the line and avoid your friends or especially the internet commenting about your lack of airflow, they always think they're geniuses too, like, oh, that case doesn't have airflow, especially when it's only like single-digit degree of difference. Whatever, I get a little heated up about this. Just go ahead and buy a case that has a nice airflow panel. You won't be unhappy with it. Moving on here though, we get to RGB products, and this one is honestly extremely important in my book, and it's a concept that I try to deploy in all of my builds, and that's to simply use the same RGB brands throughout your whole PC. Mixing and matching different RGB products is super annoying because different brands use different cables, connectors, and even software, and if you want to quickly change the color scheme of your build, it's really annoying because you might have to use software for the RAM, a button in the back of the case for your case fans, and then the motherboard BIOS for the CPU cooler. If you buy a single 6-pack of fans like this Easy DIY Moonlit kit, that will eliminate most of that because not only do you have fans that have a remote control so you can change them all at once without even having Windows installed, but all of the fans just have a single cable routing to the control box, so it's much easier to cable manage compared to those fans with both a PWM and an RGB connector. You can also use one of these fans on the CPU cooler. This is the Vitro V5, and it did come included with its own RGB fan, but rather than just have that by itself, it's not only easier to use one from your set of case fans, but it also just looks nicer when every single fan inside the build is the exact same RGB fan. It looks so much cleaner like this. And finally, for the last strategy to make your PC easier to buy and build is to plan your color scheme ahead of time. This is obviously super important to aesthetic PC builders like myself and the ZTT community, but if you want to take your aesthetic game to the next level like we do, you'll need to do a serious amount of planning before buying anything. Builds never look top-notch when you can tell that the color scheme wasn't planned right. There's also things like the SSD having a super ugly color that clashes with the build. Motherboards and graphics cards have ugly yellow lines on them that ruin the whole aesthetic. aesthetic. And if you want to buy cable extensions like I'd obviously recommend you do, you're gonna need to figure out which color before you buy anything. I definitely recommend buying these Asia Horse extensions because they're the GOAT and my absolute favorite. And for builds like this, I know that the red is gonna match up well with the red RGBs of both the Easy DIY fans and the RGBs on our EVGA graphics card. For aesthetic planning, I would recommend that you just choose one single color that goes well with black. Pretty much the theme of this entire video is to just make things very simple, and instead of choosing like an elaborate color scheme, just make all of the components like I did black, and then choose one color to use for your RGB colors, the cable extensions, the RGB on the graphics card and whatnot. Now with this PC specifically, it actually does look pretty good with these white RGBs, but the problem, which I'm trying to avoid for you guys, is whenever I choose the RGB on the graphics card to white, it's like a yellowish white, which doesn't look good at all with the bluish white of these RGB fans. So just make things simple, just go with all black and then one color. Hopefully all or at least some of those 7 tips were helpful to most of you, and after everything we went over, here's what my completed build is looking like using all 7 of these tips, and here's the final parts list. Please note that the tips I gave you can apply to any range of PC. They aren't just for PC builds like this that are super baller, but before wrapping up this baller PC build, let's quickly take a look at the performance with some benchmarks. Not gonna go through each game individually here because that's not the point of the video, but for those of you that are wondering how this 12600K and RTX 3070 combo is performing, here's the results for 10 titles, and we're obviously testing in 1440p today. As you can see, we're testing mostly in the high to ultra settings for most games. That's absolutely not a problem for the 3070, as this is a seriously baller gaming PC as you would expect. And once again, if you want to win this gaming PC for yourself, then head on over to my Twitter at Zach's Tech Turf and just retweet that pinned tweet. And big thanks again to WD Black for not only making this video possible, but this giveaway possible as well.